What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode. In today's video, we're gonna be taking apart my turbocharger, inspecting it, basically refurbishing it, and I'm gonna show you if your turbo needs to be replaced. Now, I'm also gonna show you, should you wanna take the internals of it apart, you guys can easily do that. However, it requires a little bit more work and some special tools that I don't have access to, but I can show you what the pros would do. So I have my turbocharger that I removed from my Mini Cooper. So here's my Mini, engine's out of it, turbo's out of it, and we're gonna be ripping that thing apart. So I potentially have someone that is going to be buying this thing. However, if you guys wanna buy another one of these things for your Coopers, just let me know, send me an email. But that's not what this video is about. See this turbo right here? We're gonna be separating it, we're gonna be inspecting it, and we're gonna make it look not only better than new, but we're gonna actually have it so that the performance of this turbo is going to exceed the new characteristics of a new turbocharger. So let's get into it. So everything that you see right here is what we're going to need to take apart the turbocharger. So we have very simple tools here. We have a brass mallet, we have a little ball peen hammer right here, we have a 1/4 or a 1/4 inch drive ratchet, we have some sockets, and a little bit of penetrating fluid. So I already went off camera and removed the two nuts that are securing the wastegate up to the turbocharger. So it's held in place by two 10mm nuts, one here and one here. Those are found on the cold side of the turbo, and on the hot side of the turbo, there's going to be another nut that's found right here, and that secures the wastegate in place. Now, as soon as you take those out, the entire wastegate can be slid out and removed, just like that. So we're gonna set that aside, and we're gonna continue to work on the turbocharger itself. Before we go and continue and remove any other parts on this turbo, let me first identify some components of the turbo. So if we turn it on its side, we're gonna mention here that we have the cold side of the turbo and the hot side. So the hot side is where the exhaust fumes and the exhaust gases go through. The cold side is where all the fresh, regular, atmospheric, clean air goes through. So the way this thing works is this is propelled through here. This is a twin scroll turbo. Air is gonna be forced through here, and when that air is pushing in this hole, it's going to actually be spinning the turbine wheel that's found in the turbo. So there's a turbine wheel that's found on the cold side and another one on the hot side. So when you go ahead and take this thing apart, that turbine wheel is connected to a shaft that is connected to both sides. So it's all the way through, and it goes from here to here. So when this side here spins, this side here spins. So the turbine wheel is propelled on this side, and this is where all the energy and everything comes from. So it spins from the exhaust gases found on the hot side of the turbocharger, spins that little compressor wheel, transfers that energy to the cold side, and then compresses that cold air that is inserted through this orifice. It's compressed, and then it's put out through here, and this then leads to the intercooler and then the intake manifold. Now, once you have all that compressed air in here, it has to be fed into the engine, and then should you ever want to let off the throttle, that's where the wastegate and the blow-off valve or recirculatory valve come into play. So to take this thing apart, we're first going to begin by removing this V-band clamp that's found on the exhaust side of the turbo. So you can see that it's clamping this guy here up to the center part of the turbo. Now this center part is not the exhaust or intake side. This is its own separate piece. And this is where the oil and coolant gets fed through. So you can see that we have an oil orifice there, we have our coolant orifices there, and on the opposite side, we have the other oil orifice. Some turbos are only coolant fed, some turbos are only oil fed. Now you might even have a turbo that's neither, but in this situation, this is both. So I'm gonna first begin by removing and taking off the 10mm nut right here for the V-band clamp. And then what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to separate the exhaust side from the turbo cartridge. Once you have that off, you can hit the V-band clamp off. And that right there is going to separate, or at least allow us to separate, the cartridge from the exhaust side. Now sometimes this can be very stuck, so I'm gonna be using a little bit of penetrating fluid on here, and it's gonna hopefully help me to separate these two. So if your turbocharger is old or it has some use to it, it might be a little tricky to separate these two. So on a new turbo, you should just be able to separate and pull these two apart. However, what I'm going to have to do is use my hammer. So with the turbo like this, if we lift up and hold the cold side of the turbo up in the air and then slightly tap on the exhaust side, it should separate and release the cartridge from the hot side of the turbo. So you don't need to hit it hard, you just want to tap it and just lift it and do the same thing by spinning it around. Now, if you have to, keep spraying a little bit of penetrating fluid in there because I can see it working. And the more fluid you can get to penetrate in between the rusted components, the easier it's going to want to separate. Now you can see that it's starting to separate. So if you spray a little bit more penetrating fluid in there, it will help relieve and get rid of all the stress and rust that's found inside of there in between the crack. But if you keep at it, it will separate the cartridge from the exhaust. Just like that. So you can see now that we have the exhaust side separated from the cartridge, which is this middle section, here of the cold side right now. So we can still separate the cartridge from here. Now, in order to do that, what we're going to do is remove these 4 10mm bolts that are surrounding the cartridge from the cold side of the turbo. Now, the reason why you want to get your turbo up to operating temperature and your oil up to operating temperature before you go and hammer on your car is because of this. Now this here is the compressor wheel. So there's the hot side and there's going to be a cold side of it. Now when this spins at 130,000 plus times a minute, the coolant and the oil that's found inside of here that is feeding this and keeping it so it's properly lubricated is crucially important to stay warm. Because if it's not, this will wear out because you'll get metal on metal, and that's where your turbocharger will fail. So it's important to, before you hammer on your car, to get the engine up to proper operating temperature so this can spin freely and not wear down on you. Before I put the hot side of the turbo away, I first want to show you something. So there's a little pin right here, okay? And this little pin is a guide pin so that you can properly align the cartridge. See that little hole? Right in there. You want to set it up so that when you put this back together, that little hole lines up with this little pin. So that no matter what, when you take this apart, you don't have to make sure that you align it or anything because it will only go back in one way. So next up, we're going to remove these 4 bolts that are securing the cartridge up to the cold side of the turbo. So I'm going to be spraying a little bit of penetrating fluid on each of these so they come out nice and easy. Now you can use hand tools if you want, but I'm going to make life a little bit easier and use my impact driver. So these bolts should not be in there really tight because they're not really under pressure. They're just preventing the cartridge from escaping from the cold side. And you should be able to just lift it out just like that. And you can see that right here, this is the cold side, and this here is the cartridge. So should your turbo fail, should any of these components wear out on you or break down, you can buy and replace just this piece so you can continue to use your cold side and your hot side. So replacing this part is a lot cheaper than replacing the full turbo. These components right here are the main parts of a turbocharger. So we have our hot side, our cartridge, and our cold side. Now the biggest part of the turbocharger that's going to fail is the cartridge right here. Now you can take this apart by removing the little nut that's found on the end, and you can separate everything from one another. Now the reason why I am not going to do that is because once you take this apart and you try to adjust anything or even replace any component themselves, what's going to happen is the turbocharger is not going to be properly balanced. So if you can see on the end of the turbo right here, where is it? There's usually going to be a part on the actual, like the bolt on top, that's going to be shaved down right there. That little part there that's shaved down, I'm not sure if you can see that. That's the way that they balance it. So the turbocharger, the entire wheel, along with the shaft, is all going to be balanced because when this goes and spins at over 100,000 RPMs, if there's any kind of imbalance, that's going to cause a very big vibration and potential problem for the cartridge, and it's going to mean that the turbo is going to fail. So if you do want to replace any part in here, my advice to you is that if you're going to be replacing it with stock stuff, just purchase a new cartridge and then slap everything back together. But if you want to go with an upgraded and you want to replace maybe the cold side with a bigger wheel or even the exhaust side, you can do that, but I would get that sent out to a shop and have it so that they can do it, and since they have the proper tools, it will be done right. So then that is now going to be completing that part. Now I'm going to be refurbishing this turbocharger and making this better than new. So the turbocharger itself, there is no play in here. It does look really nice. Now the only part that doesn't look so nice is this. You can see that it's kind of old and doesn't look great. And the same thing goes for the exhaust side. So I'm going to be taking all this back, cleaning it up, making it look new, and then we're going to make it look not only new, but we're going to make it so it performs better than new. So this guy right here is the main part that we're going to be upgrading. Putting our attention to the hot side, what we're first going to do is clean this up a little bit. So I've got a little bit of Scotch-Brite that's going to be cleaning up all the little imperfections, the little surface rust that's on there, but I'm also going to be cleaning up and making the internals of this also really nice. I'm not looking to take back any metal that's in here. I'm just looking to clean this up and remove any surface imperfections. Because you saw that when removing this from the cartridge, it was pretty difficult. So I'm just going to be cleaning this up and just remove any kind of gunk, carbon, or whatever that we have inside of here. Now you don't really want to use anything too abrasive because we don't want to actually shave down any parts in here and really make it bad. So what I'm just going to be doing is using this little piece of Scotch-Brite to clean this up. So with that pretty much done, we now want to take care of the actual housing part itself. So you can use a brush like this or even a smaller version. I'll be linking this stuff in the description box so you guys can find everything. But I'm just going to try and knock down any surface rust that's on here. We're going to be eventually coating this in a ceramic paint, and it's actually going to keep the internal temperatures of the engine bay down because the ceramic paint is actually going to contain the heat and actually give us power by doing that. Now, if you do have a sandblaster, you can go ahead and put this thing in there, but just be careful because if you have any wastegate parts or any other components that are somewhat fragile, be careful not to ruin them, but you can indeed stick this inside a sandblaster and clean up all this rust. Because if you can throw it in there, it'll be a lot faster than doing all this by hand. Now with it like that, that's pretty much good. So we're gonna be cleaning and removing all of the surface contaminants that are on there. And then we're gonna be cleaning this up, painting this up, and sealing it with a ceramic paint. So next up, we're going to want to suspend this up in the air. So I'm using an old coat hanger. I'm just gonna be putting this inside one of the mounts. So like one of the holes. Slide it through. And then we're gonna tie this together so that we can actually lift and hold this thing up in the air. So we're gonna be painting it and prepping it like this.
So to get it ready, I'm going to be using some brake clean, agitate the can, and then spray down every single square inch of the turbo. Now keep in mind, any kind of residue or anything that has come off of the turbo during the sanding process is going to be on the turbocharger. So we want to remove that before we put down any paint on there. Now while we let that dry, I'm going to be working on the cold side of the turbo. So using that same piece of Scotch-Brite, I'm just going to be rubbing down and scraping off any surface stuff that's on here. Now if you want to make your life a little bit easier, you can make this a lot cleaner by throwing the entire thing inside of a sandblaster. And that is actually what I'm going to be doing. But before I just toss it in there, I'm going to mask up anything that I don't want sandblasted. So you can see that there's a little cover that has any serial number information on there. I'm going to cover that with masking tape so that it doesn't get stripped off and it doesn't make it so that it's completely blank. And then at that point, you can throw the cold side into the sandblasting cabinet. So once you throw it inside there, you're going to clean up and basically try to remove any kind of surface pitting or any imperfections found on the casting part of the turbocharger. So you're not going to be trying to shoot the internals of it, you just want to get the stuff that you're going to be able to see when the turbo is mounted on the car. So we're going to try and just remove any dirt, any grime, any kind of imperfections that are on there. That way, when we put our paint on here, it's going to look really nice and it's going to stay looking this nice for a long time. As soon as that's done, we're going to hang it just like we did with the exhaust side. So we're going to use an old coat hanger to suspend it and then spray it with brake clean. While the brake clean is evaporating on the cold side, we're going to be masking up the hot side. So again, with that 3M tape, we're going to be masking up any ports and any parts that we don't want paint on. So any inlets or outlets for the turbo are going to be covered up. Once the turbocharger is masked, try not to touch the surface of the turbocharger so that your oils from your finger do not get transmitted onto there. But after that, you can suspend it up in the air and start spraying your paint down. So I'm going to be using a VHT high heat ceramic paint, and it's made specifically for this application. This kind of exhaust paint can withstand super high temperatures and not flake off or burn off. The same kind of thing goes for the cold side. So once you have everything masked up, I'm going to be using a silver paint instead of the black. Now I'm trying to make it so that the silver side looks very similar to an OEM finish. So I'm using a metallic silver paint. I'm not trying to make the turbo black or anything. I just want to have it so it looks great and it performs well too. Once you have them both coated, let them sit for a little bit, and then you can go back in afterwards and spray them down with a second coat for the exhaust side, and then following that a second coat for the cold side. For the exhaust side, you want to make sure that every square inch of it is covered in this ceramic paint so that the heat actually retains inside the turbo and then goes through the exhaust. Now the benefit of that is that it's going to reduce the engine bay temperatures because not all that heat is going to stay at the part. Try to change the angle that you're spraying the hot side at, and you're going to get this to be completely coated in no time. After the second coat, you should be completely coated, but if you'd like, you also can do a final third coat just for that added protection. Now, as for the cold side, because this component is made out of aluminum, you're only doing this to make this aesthetically pleasing. So because we don't have any bare aluminum exposed, it's not going to oxidize and corrode like it did before. Since we have paint on here, it's going to look nice, it's going to stay looking this nice, and we're not going to have any problems with this. So technically, after the first coat, we should in essence be good. But just for the sake of it, I'm going to do a second coat to cover it up. You don't have to go with the same color paints that I used. If you want, you can even use a regular clear coat for the cold side and a silver paint for the hot side. It's entirely up to you, but I'm just going to be making it look so that it's very clean and nice looking. You'll see what I'm talking about towards the end of this video. After letting both of them dry overnight, you can then handle them and remove any masking that's found on each of them. I'm going to be removing all the masking tape so that I can reinstall the cartridge back into the turbo. So once you have it done, everything should look good, everything should look crisp and clean, and then putting it back together should be really simple.
So everything right here are the components that we're going to need to put the turbocharger back together. So after taking care of the cartridge, after taking care of the exhaust side of the turbo and the intake side, everything looks so much better than before. Now, I want to show you guys also this. If your turbocharger cartridge has any shaft play, when you pull and you tug on the turbocharger, the compressor wheel, if it moves in and out or up and down, depending on how much it moves up and down or in and out, it needs to be replaced. But this one here is tight. There is like the slight amount of in and out play, but that is quite standard on these John Cooper Works turbochargers. As soon as these things get to be a little bit old, they have a tiny bit of shaft play. But it's very minimal, and I would say it's probably like, it's less than 1 millimeter of shaft play. It is tiny. However, if it's very bad, if it's very noticeable, if you can move it up like 0.5 centimeter, that would be crazy, and this definitely needs to be replaced with a new cartridge. However, with it like this, we can put everything back together. Now the install to put everything back together is going to be quite simple because there's not really that many components to it. Before we put this back together, we want to make sure that the compressor wheel can spin freely and it doesn't make any noises. Because if there's any grinding or if there's any problems with it spinning at this slow of an RPM, when it spins that much faster, that's going to become a problem. So I want to see if you guys can hear this. And by hear this, I mean hear nothing. Nothing. So the turbocharger cartridge is good. We're going to throw all this stuff back together, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. It's quite simple. It takes a couple seconds, but I'm going to show you how.
So first things first, I'm going to have it so that the turbocharger cartridge will be able to be removed from the hot side very easily. So if you remember from before, we were kind of struggling when we were removing it. So right here I have some Permatex nickel anti-seize, and it's rated for extremely high temperatures. So I'm just going to be outlining the perimeter of the cartridge so it will be able to be removed very easily from the hot side. Now as soon as you have it on, you should then be able to mount up the cold side of the turbocharger up to it. Now I kind of did this in backwards order. You should be putting the anti-seize on afterwards so you're not getting your hands dirty, but it's pretty straightforward. Just reinstall the cartridge back up to the turbo, and then there's going to be those 4 bolts that we removed earlier. We have to reinstall those back in so it secures the cartridge up to the cold side. There isn't necessarily a torque spec for these bolts, but keep in mind that it's a steel bolt going into aluminum. You just want to have it so that it's snug and it's not going to be going anywhere. By just using simple hand tools, you'll be able to get this done. I wouldn't use any kind of impact tools to install these components right here. Next up on the cartridge, we want to find the hole for the guide pin so that the guide pin on the hot side of the turbocharger will be able to be mounted up very easily. So as soon as you line it up, it should be able to slide right in. Now if it can't, just grab a brass hammer and just tap on it so that it's going to want to slide in. Now as soon as you have that done, grab your V-band clamp and tighten that guy up so that's going to secure the cartridge up to the hot side. Now at that point, you're pretty much done.
Everything looks so much better than before. So the cold side is refinished. The cartridge now looks better. There's no play. Everything's inspected. The exhaust side is ceramic coated. So because of that ceramic coating, it's actually going to be keeping everything else in the engine bay colder because this actually seals in most of the heat. It does indeed make a difference on performance. So once you have your turbo rebuilt like this, you can reinstall your wastegate. You can put back on your blow-off valve or diverter valve should your turbo have one built into it, and you guys can go from there. But you can see that it looks amazing. Now the point of this video isn't necessarily to disassemble it and also take apart the internals of the cartridge. Now, if I had the tools to take apart the compressor wheel and then rebalance it so that it's properly balanced and everything will be good to go, I would happily do that. But considering I don't have those tools, I didn't go through that procedure. Now, if you want in a future video, I can probably get my hands on an old cartridge and tear it apart to show you guys all the internal components of that. But as for this video, that's where this is going to end. I showed you how to disassemble it, I showed you how to inspect it, and I hope you guys learned a thing or two from this video. Now, last but not least, if you guys have learned a thing or two from this video, click that like button and don't forget to share it with your buddies because maybe they would also learn a thing or two from this video. Now, if you guys are wanting to find a little bit more information about the turbo, or maybe you want to rebuild it or have other questions regarding it, send me an email at malamistrossi@gmail.com because if you guys want to rebuild it or even have questions regarding where to get these parts, let me know because I know how expensive these turbochargers are from the dealerships. They cost an arm and a leg, so rebuilding it and going through this procedure is a lot easier than buying the entire thing outright and then just slapping that on your car. Now, I looked at pricing. You're probably looking at spending $1,000 plus on a new turbo, which is the exact same thing as what we have. However, if you guys want to buy a replacement cartridge, you guys can do that. Or if you have other questions, again, send me an email. But anyways, guys, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, throw them down in the comment section below, and I'd be more than happy to help. Again, guys, thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.